Good morning.
Yo.
Hello.
Laura, I have granted screen sharing permission.
Yay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Hope everybody in the US had an enjoyable extra day off.
Yeah, it was great. A little relaxing. Finally starting to feel like summer here in Seattle.
Were you sleepless?
Actually, I didn't sleep very well, but I don't think that had anything to do with the long weekend.
I spent the weekend with some friends who have a 3-year-old. This was the first time I ever really met a 3-year-old. It was pretty fun, but we did a lot of trucks. I learned a lot about trucks and trains.
Nice.
That was my entire weekend. I have a 3-year-old and he
Okay,
doesn't ever stop talking about trucks.
Yeah, we also would stop to watch like the garbage trucks do, okay. So we had the same experience.
I actually spent part of this weekend with my nephew, who's he's 1.5. I guess he's almost 2 now. And he's not talking so much about trucks yet, but he was miming the garbage truck a lot. So I think it just keeps happening.
Such a widespread interest.
I guess garbage trucks are cool.
Maybe we should include them in multi-cluster somehow.
Good
yeah, the new garbage truck API.
Exactly.
The chance of naming collision will be low. This idea may have legs or wheels, as the case may
be. Although, I never get, I'm never cease to be surprised by people's ability to get hung up on names. So we'll find something.
True, so true.
All right, Laura, I think you have the sole agenda item for today. So you can take it away whenever you're ready.
Cool. I wanted to revisit, thanks for Jeremy also for reminding me about this alpha graduation blocker for the cluster ID cap, about whether we want to allow cluster IDs to be subdomains, which I interpret to mean have dots in them. I dug up the commit that had the conversation from the past pull request on it where this got put. So I will actually drop this in the chat if people want that, though I'm not super sure that Zoom chat allowed me to put the whole thing. But also just briefly, this top one is the conversation by Paul, and feel free to expand more, Paul, but basically that we suspect that people might want to use a subdomain here instead of just a label, and that you were okay with expanding to use subdomains later, but Tim felt that expanding would be a breaking change. And if we have use cases, we should talk about it sooner rather than later. So kind of want to open the floor if people have opinions on that or feelings, if they themselves might want their cluster ID to be something like, I don't know, west dot banana. That's not a great example, but if someone has a better example too, I'd be interested. And Paul, do you maybe want to speak any more to your suspicion as well?
Yeah, I mean, so here's I think one of the things in my head when I wrote that, and I think Tim's got a great point, was that secret keys couldn't originally have a dot in them. And we had I'm sorry, I may be misremembering this. It's been quite a while. Like TLDR, modular the details, secret keys, for example, used to have extremely restrictive names, and people didn't want that. So like they've been relaxed over time, and in general, my bias is therefore to like, not solely because of that, but in general, my bias is toward like let's keep as many doors open as we can, but let's also not like make things so like featureful that like we're putting the cart before the horse. So I do agree with Tim though, and I think he makes a good point. I think my preference would be, I think I'd be much happier to have like at least a couple parties that can tell us what their use case is for allowing it to be a subdomain.
Yeah, +1 on that. I think we really need to figure out the use cases. Like I can imagine some, but I don't have anything concrete.
Does anyone on the call themselves or know somebody who would use this type of naming convention, or you could perceive uses this a type of naming convention for their clusters that I guess basically boils down to has dots in it?
I'm pretty sure we're going to use this in cluster API. Like it's going to line up with the way cluster API talks about clusters. And those don't have dots in them in
Interesting.
the usage of it that I'm familiar with. But I shouldn't speak for all of cluster API. I should maybe only speak for one implementation.
That's a good
I mean,
lead,
what I
though.
will say, labels, starting with labels, well, switching to subdomain would be a breaking change. Like,
yeah,
labels can be used everywhere, and that's kind of a nice thing. Like you can stick the cluster ID absolutely anywhere if it's a label. So unless we have some concrete use cases, I would probably skew that way, but that's, curious what everyone else thinks.
so it was Paul who said he suspects people would want a subdomain, right?
Yes, I think it's very possible, but like I also feel strongly like we should avoid building for things that we think, but that no one has said, because it's easy to think that X or Y thing will happen, and then it doesn't happen. So I think that I'd love to have the reason for going the route of allow it to be a subdomain be that a lot of folks said that it would be much more useful to them as a concept if it could be, and then we could figure out how to handle that from a backward compatibility standpoint at that time.
Okay, it also sounds like maybe this conversation must have happened in cluster API based on what Gabe is saying, right?
I think, yeah, maybe we should
Maybe I can dig
go
it up
talk to
somehow or
them.
find them. Yeah, get a lead on who there talked about this, so I can at least ping in Slack or on the mailing list, and then follow up some more on that too, and see if there was already some research on this project.
Yeah, because I know the cluster name is used for like deriving a bunch of other resources, and I don't know, I can't remember which resources allow dots in their names and which ones don't. But that I could see that being an issue.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's a great lead. Anybody else have feelings one way or the other? I'm hearing a trend towards like double check with cluster API lore, and then but we're kind of trending avoid subdomains if we don't have anything concrete, so that it's most generally useful. And do we need to talk in depth about like a future like migration path, since we know it will be a breaking change later? Or do we think that's also putting the cart before the horse?
I think we can just push that personally.
Yeah, I agree. It's probably worth mentioning, so at least it's clear that we thought about it. We're aware that
Sure.
this might be a problem.
Okay.
But I guess one concern is if we go with a label, we're probably stuck. Like, I guess alpha to beta, we could change it, but beyond that, probably not, right? Because to what Gabe said, you know, which resources that you would derive from the cluster ID can take labels, right? And which or which can take subdomains is something we would need to solve, and some things would start breaking.
Gotcha. Okay.
Okay, I
Well,
just back channeled with someone and heard
oh,
that
nice.
we don't use dots in cluster API. The response was, goodness, why would we do that? So yeah, I think label is safe from that perspective.
I like that.
Cool. Well, I think I'll still follow through a little bit to see if there is more to that
Yeah.
emotional feeling about it. But yeah, that's interesting to know because they definitely had to have considered it. And maybe it's all in everybody's brains right now, but it does seem that there's kind of a known set of resources that cannot handle this. And I can, you know, just confirm, and I'm sure plenty of those we want to be able to derive from in the future is the concern here that I'm hearing. Derive to, I guess.
Yeah.
Cool.
That sounds right.
All right. Well, this is good. Helps me with this part. We'll follow up with cluster API a little bit more. We'll write in the doc that we are trending towards staying subdomains. We know that this will be a breaking change for X usages, which I can cross confirm. In the future, if we do need to change that between alpha and beta, then we need to solve that problem then.
Cool.
Cool. That's all I got today. Hark, something new has appeared. I will pass the floor to Gabe then.
Hey, I was like going back and forth about how much to talk about this. I was hoping to be a little more prepared, but I figured I would still talk at people for a couple minutes, and then if the conversation isn't useful, we can end it. So I got some good feedback on my PR last week from folks, and I think the most substantial one was sort of like sensitivity about what to call things and the reluctance to like introduce a new named thing, like capital T thing, which I completely get. So like stepping back a bit, I was trying to think through like what are the guarantees that we want to ensure, like what do we want to make sure is true across various implementations that might be weaker than the current definition of a cluster set, but still like that's like the sensible thing that we want to ensure. And so I took a crack at writing something down, and I guess I should probably paste that in there rather than saying it poorly. But yeah, I wanted to sort of like get initial thoughts from this, and if the reaction is positive, then I can like make PR changes based on it. So okay, so like I was thinking through like invariants, like system invariants, like what needs to always just be true. And so I think it's this weaker form is like a set of namespaces and a set of clusters, and making a statement about those two sets. So specifically, like for any pod in any of those namespaces, the set of service imports that it can reach shouldn't depend on which cluster the pod is deployed to. And then, so that's sort of like the consuming side of the invariant, and then the publishing side of the invariant or the exporting side is similar. Like for any service export in any of the namespaces, the availability of that service shouldn't be impacted if you deploy it to a different cluster. or if you change the set of clusters it's deployed to. And so this allows for us to have like cluster set like properties without requiring that this invariant hold across all namespaces of the clusters that you're talking about, that you can sort of scale it down just to a set, like a well-defined set of namespaces. But like cluster set becomes this sort of like simple case where this invariant holds for all namespaces. But like I said, yeah, we could have an implementation that's sort of like has a smaller set of namespaces for which this is true, or various sets that are for which this is true, but those sets don't interact with one another. Does this make sense? Any thoughts?
On quick initial reading, I think so. I guess I need to sit with the wording a little bit longer, but so we had a good chat last week, and I guess does this, in your mind, does this still kind of fit that model of from a consuming cluster set consumer standpoint? It still kind of looks like the original concept of a cluster set, at least for all the namespaces I have access to, or
that's what I was shooting for, is like for the namespaces I have access to. And like, there's also this like transitive closure of namespaces hosting services that I might consume. So I might not be able to like do any Kubernetes API operations against those namespaces, but I can still like DNS resolve and TCP connect to things in those namespaces.
Okay. Cool.
But yeah, that's the relation, which I wasn't sure like what, if there was a good word to talk about it, but it was like the reachability, I guess, or like the connectability of those things. And if you just like do the transitive closure of everything that I can connect to, or that the things I can connect to, then that's the set, which might not be a full, all of the namespaces, but it's like, that's the unit that I think makes sense. And it like minimizes surprise. It basically prevents surprise for app developers when they're moving their pods or services around.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of context here, I think, from that conversation last week that may be hard for other people to
okay, I didn't frame this very well.
No, it's tough because we spoke about this for half an hour and then I think in that context these concise invariants make a lot of sense. But I guess the goal, as I see it, is that for anyone who operates in some set of namespaces, their experience is like the cluster set as we've been kind of defining it, where a namespace is a namespace, and namespace sameness applies across all the clusters in that set. But as someone who only has access to a subset of namespaces in a cluster, it is acceptable if the cluster set that I see doesn't actually apply across all clusters that like some platform administrator is managing. Basically, the world beyond my namespaces isn't really relevant to me. Is my interpretation?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, the world. That's a really nice way of like summarizing it. Let me put that in the top.
Is that durable in like the case where you may have access, like you may be namespace admin on clusters A, B, C, but you're not on cluster D? Or like, is that a case of I can't see it, so it doesn't matter?
Sorry, can you make the example a little more concrete, or like take me one step further? Like what's the problem that arises in that case?
I don't have a specific problem. I'm asking if there is one.
I don't know. Okay, that's a good prompt. Let me go think about that, I guess. Yeah, I don't think so, because the relation that I'm talking about is about connectivity as opposed to permissions. But yeah, I can go chew on that.
Well, I think so. To me, I think permissions is kind of part of that. Like, if I have namespace admin on for a given namespace in clusters A, B, and C, and not in cluster D, then for this to hold true, I would have to have no access to cluster D.
Wait, why?
Because basically that would imply that, like, if the namespace, if somebody else had that namespace in cluster D, then we've kind of broken this invariant, right?
I see. Yes, if someone else, so if the namespace exists on the cluster, but I don't have permissions to, I don't own it, then yeah, that breaks this, because then someone else might deploy a thing that conflicts with mine or whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
So this would hold true if I had no access to D at all, but not if I had access to D for other namespaces.
Because if you had access to D for other namespaces, then presumably you'd be able to connect to things in that namespace on D that you don't own.
Right. And it would look different.
Right. So I think maybe my answer for that is like, we shouldn't just say like you can't have access to anything else on D. I think it needs to be like the isolation, like the administrator or the cluster might be set up so that you don't have the ability to look up or connect to things in that other namespace in D.
Okay. I need to try to wrap my head around this a bit.
Okay. Maybe so let me go make this is not like yeah, let me try to write this down, and so then with the feedback can be more structured. I recognize doing this like verbally is hard.
No, it's good.
No,
It's good planting the seed though.
Okay, yeah.
So where I was coming from, Gabe, was like, if I understood how you had characterized your use case, I felt as though there was a use case, like there was a property like in how you characterized your use case that originally motivated this whole thing, where that was true, where like there was like one namespace across a few clusters that like had different owners or a different purpose across the same name. So that's where I was coming from.
I see. Yeah. Okay.
Basically asking whether your original use case would be durable in how you characterize this.
Okay. Yeah, that's I should have done that before talking about it here. But yes, let me go thing on that, and good. That's a very good prompt. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay. Well, thanks for listening to me ramble. That was helpful.
No problem.
Thanks for bringing this up.
Just for the record, I think it's good that we're having this conversation. Like I not attempting to diminish the importance of it at all. But I want to make sure that like if the way that we characterize it then like makes it not apply to your original use case,
yeah,
we need
totally.
to think of another formulation.
Yeah, then I would have some egg on my face. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
All right. Okie doke. Well, sounds like we're at the end for today. Thanks everybody for coming, and we'll see you next time. Everybody have a great week.
Awesome. Thank you all.
Yeah. Thanks. Bye.
All right.
See ya.
Bye.